Let's look at another problem in Leetcode, which comes under the top interview questions playlist. This is marked as a strings problem. So when you look at this problem, it looks rather easy, but when you start to solve it, you realize the number of edge cases you need to take care of, and that's what makes it fit into the medium category. So let's get into it and look at the description of the problem. So what you have to do is convert a string into an integer. So the first case would be that this string can contain leading white spaces. And if it contains white spaces, you need to ignore it. The next character in the string, if the string is valid, should be a negative sign or a positive sign. So this would directly influence the final output. So if it's a negative sign, you would have a negative output, and if it's a positive sign, you would have a positive output. And if neither sign is mentioned, then we assume it's a positive output. Of course, when you're converting strings into integers, you will need to take care of the leading zeros. If it's a 0032, it should be read as a 32. So this is another edge case which makes the problem rather challenging. You have to make sure that the result you've accumulated or the string you've converted into an integer at each step needs to be within this range. So the string, if it goes beyond the minimum, that's -2 to the power of 31, it needs to be clamped here and you need to return -2 to the power of 31. And if the integer, the string that's converted into the integer goes beyond this maximum number, then it needs to be clamped at this number and you just have to return this number. So let's look at the examples. So here the input is a string 42 and the output very simply is 42 because in step one, they look at case one where there are no leading white spaces, case two where there's no negative or positive sign, and case three would just be to read the digits. And if there is anything other than digits, that would mean the string is invalid and we would just return a zero. In the second example, they give an example with leading white spaces, so we need to ignore all these white spaces. We need to process this negative symbol, and then we process the actual digits in the string and convert it into an integer. In the third example, we process only the first four characters in the string, which are digits, and we ignore whatever comes after that because we know they're neither digits nor anything relevant. So let's get into writing the code. So it's always helpful to store the length of the integer length of the string in a variable for, let's call it n. And we're going to store the maximum and minimum delimiters in two variables known as max and min. So max would be equal to 2 exponent 31 minus 1, and min would be equal to -1 into 2 to the exponent of 31. Then we'll use the variable index to keep track of where we are in the index of the string, and result would be used to store our final integer. So first we need to take care of case 1, which is, we need to take care of case 1, which is the leading white spaces. Ignore the leading white spaces. So while index is lesser than the length of the string, and if there is a white space at the current index, then we simply ignore it by incrementing the index of the string. And so this would take care of any number of leading white spaces since we're putting it in a while loop. So next we have to take care of case 2, which is either the positive sign or the negative sign. So let's take care of it in an if condition. If the index is within the limits of the length of the string and the current index is equal to the negative sign, for the sake of consistency, oops, I'm gonna use, instead of double quotes, I'm gonna use single quotes. Remember, in the interview, you should probably be consistent with what kind of quotes you're using. So over here, I'm going to introduce a new variable called sign to keep track if my final result needs to be negative or positive. Obviously, if I've encountered the negative sign, then my final result should be negative. So within this variable, I'm going to store a -1, and I would just multiply whatever integer I get as a result into this variable sign, which now would store a -1, thus would make it negative. And again, I check if the index is within the range and the if the current position of the string is a positive index, then I would just make sign equal to 1. And in both cases, I would have to increment my index by 1. So now let's take care of case 3, which is reading and processing only digits. So while the index is within the range of the length of the string and the index is a digit, I'm going to use the built-in Python function to check that. So let's store the current digit we've encountered into the variable called digit. Of course, we have to convert it into an integer because currently it's in string format. And so we say if so now we've stored the current digit we've encountered into digit. So now we have to calculate the total integer. So that would be result into result into 10 plus digit. So how this would work is if you have 42, so obviously we would read from the left. So first result is equal to 0, and we would read 4. So we would have 0, sorry, 10. We would have 0 into 10 plus 4, which would be equal to 4. And in the next iteration, we would read 2. So our digit would be equal to 2. And our result was 4. So we would have a result into 10 plus 2. That would be 42. So this is how it would calculate the final integer when we're reading digits from the left. So now that we've calculated our result, we also need to check if the result is within the limits. So if result into the sign, if it's assuming it's positive, if it's greater than max, or result into sign, assuming it's negative, is lesser than min, then I would return max. If the sign was positive, that's 1. Otherwise, I would return the minimum value. That is this value over here. So then I think we've taken care of everything in case 3. So then I think we can go ahead and return the final value, which is the result into sign. Okay, let's see if this runs. Oh, I made a very silly mistake, which is I forgot to increment index in this loop. And there you have it. Of course, Leetcode is pretty inconsistent with the efficiency, but this has a big O of n time complexity, and it's pretty efficient.